Teaching While Queer is a podcast for LGBTQIA+ teachers, administrators, and anyone who works in academia to share their stories. Hi, my name is Bryan Stanton, a queer theater educator in San Antonio, Texas. Each week, I bring you stories from around the world centered on the experiences of LGBTQIA folks in academia. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and enjoy Teaching While Queer. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Teaching While Queer. I am your host, Bryan Stanton, and I am so excited to invite to the podcast today, Seth Day. How are you doing today, Seth?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. Tell me a little bit, where are you at? Where are you located?
I am emotionally or physically. I am actually from New York originally, but I now currently live in Montreal, Quebec in Canada. So that's fun.
Oh, wow. I haven't had anybody on the podcast from Canada yet. So this is our second international episode. We should have some confetti or something to throw in the air. I'm so excited to have you here. So just getting started, usually on the podcast, we kind of work chronologically. So tell me a little bit about what it was like for you as a young queer person.
So it's actually interesting. I was thinking about this question, and I was like, I didn't wasn't even on my radar that I was queer until I was like well into college, probably like right about when I graduated college. So it was an interesting question to reflect on because I didn't like actively know that I was queer. I wasn't actively in those communities at that time, but I was always like very different and very weird, and just like I was like the person showing up to school in like full anime costumes and like just handing out cupcakes for no reason. I was always just like a very strange child.
So maybe just a theater kid. I don't know.
Yeah, I was also I was a theater kid
from my experience. Yeah.
Yes, I was a theater kid. How did you know? From all my gesticulating and coming into school in costume. But anyway, yeah. So I think like I didn't have. It's actually kind of interesting because I didn't have that experience from that lens, at least in a knowingly, right? So I don't have a lot to. It's like something that I want to think more about, but like I don't have a lot to say about that.
That's so interesting, and that's the thing I love about this podcast the most is just hearing the different perspectives
of
folks as they're coming on. And I've had quite a few people actually that I've interviewed where they were like, I didn't really realize until I was in college or just after college or in the workforce already living my life. And I think it's so interesting how each of us has our own journey. Sure. So if you don't mind, would you share a little bit about your journey of discovery for yourself?
Yeah, sure. It's actually quite hilarious. I think it's pretty funny because at the time I was probably like just about to graduate college, and I had met my now wife then. I'm not sure if we were. I think we were dating at the time. I don't know. If you ask her and you ask me, we were dating. And like we started dating at different times, so who knows? But anyway, I had met her and we were like online friends and whatever. It's a whole long story, but all of this to say that one day before we had even met in person, I think because we were online friends, we didn't ever think we were going to even meet in person. Right? We were living in different countries, all this kind of stuff, and because of that, we were very honest with each other. And I told her about how I was feeling about my body and all these kinds of things. And she literally, these were like in the days, I mean, Tumblr still exists, but these were like the peak Tumblr days. And she was like, I found this post. You may be transgender. And literally like sent me a post. And I was like, wow, these are all the things I'm feeling. So I found out that I was trans through a Tumblr post that my now wife sent me.
The power of the internet.
Yes.
Right. I love that. I also love that she was so supportive of you.
Yeah.
And in that conversation, just being like, hey, I saw this and it reminded me of you. And for like, so you might be transgender. Like for someone to even like have the, I don't know, the bravery to be able to have that conversation with someone else. Cause how do you tell someone, I think you're trans?
Right. Yeah. I think it's, I think it has a lot to do with just like that kind of relationship that we had built up. But it was really funny though, because she had finally like, and then, I went through the whole process of like going to therapy and like figuring myself out and all these kinds of things. And, but it was really funny because she had finally like, we were, again, this is becoming more about my romantic life, but we were like both interested in men at the time. Like we were both like women who were interested in men, had no, so it was really like, she finally came to terms with dating a woman. And then I was like, surprise. figure your shit out again. So that was kind of a silly,
Guess what?
like,
We're not lesbians
yes,
after all.
exactly. Yeah, so it was kind of an interesting journey, and yeah, I think it was pretty like straightforward from there. I started going to therapy. I started going, and I started hormones pretty quickly. You can't see me, viewers, but I have a beautiful beard. It's very,
It's
very
a
great.
very nice beard.
Very nice beard.
Very full beard.
But yeah, and all that kind of jazz. And I started really, but that's when I started really connecting more with the queer community. I like right when I came out, actually. So my background a little bit, going back a little bit, is that I have a degree in art education from the States. And then I actually was like, screw the school system. I kind of don't believe in it for a lot of reasons. And so I nannied for about 7 years. I worked as nanny. And now, I'm kind of back into teaching, but at any rate, it was just a different kind of teaching, really.
Absolutely. As a
But
parent, like I feel like I'm teaching at school and then I'm teaching at home. So
yep,
I fully understand that.
oh my gosh. But I actually ended up getting fired for my first it was a live-in job. I had moved to another state and I got fired for being trans. So that was fun. I like didn't tell them I was trans, and then they found out, and they were like, "Get out of here." So then I lost my place. It was in Boston at the time, and I lost my place to live and my income at the same time. And I was like, you know what? I'm gonna just move to New York City, like people do, and someone will hire me there, and they did. And I, just kind of worked there for a long time, and that was sort of how I like processed my transition. And I found cool queer families to work with, and families who were more accepting, and yeah.
That's wonderful. I also love that you are living my fantasy life. I'm just gonna move to New York and somebody is
Yep.
gonna hire me.
Literally,
Like,
I was just like, whatever. I'll just take the meager savings I have. I have like 1 month's rent, and I'll just figure something out. I did.
yeah,
Oh my gosh.
that's awesome. It's literally written into several musicals. The person getting off the bus with their one suitcase and they have a
Right?
one-way ticket, right? Like it's just a part of culture for New York City. You just show up and people find work for you.
Oh,
That's
I
awesome.
had quite more than just a suitcase. I have a problem with things. But
That's hysterical. So, at the time, so you were transitioning while you were working as a nanny, and so how was it re-entering the workforce now as your fully evolved self?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm currently fully evolved, but I know what you mean. More like as as myself and sort of figuring myself out. It was actually quite wonderful because I found a family where the father is transgender and the mother was a cis woman, so they were very like aware of those things. Because the mother was also queer as well, so like they were very they understand, like when I had to take a month off to get top surgery, or like just when I was like, we would just like talk about hormones or whatever. Or, like he gave me my first razor. I was cleaning their bathroom and they had like 5 sets of razors, and I was like, why do you need these? And he was like, do you want one? I was like, great. Like it was just like a really like lovely and supportive environment. And actually, it's funny, it was twins. That was my first. I've nannied 3 sets of twins. That was my first set of twins, and one of the kids actually is transgender as well. And so it was really like wonderful to be in a space also as an educator, like where I could teach like my values and things that are important to me, right? And so I found it actually really, really awesome. And I just made sure, like after I had that experience of being fired, I literally outed myself at every interview I had, because I was like, if you're going to be transphobic, I'd rather you do it before you hire me. Like, and so it was actually quite really freeing, because I was just like, I know I'm working for people who are, especially like in their reaction, I could see, like, I had this family. I did not end up working with this family, but I was like, when I said I was trans, I think they were trying to do the like, oh, I have a black friend thing, but like in a queer way. And they were like, oh, we have friends, and I think they meant queer friends, but they just said they had friends, and I was like, me too. Like, I just kind of played dumb and was like, that's nice, like. But anyway. It was really interesting to see people's reactions.
Absolutely. And it's funny because I find myself doing that too. The more that I've dealt with adversity, the more I'm upfront about things.
Yeah.
And I think it's just smart. It's a defense mechanism, but I think it's a smart defense mechanism to just like lay the card out on the table and take me or leave me. Like, let's do
Yeah,
it that
because
now.
if you're gonna not want to work with me because of that, I'd rather find out now than get
Absolutely.
a job and then it be weird, right? Like I don't want that.
Weird or like uncomfortable, like
Yeah.
really uncomfortable. Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny because I feel like these are things that a lot of people don't think about.
Yeah.
Right? You could just go living your life every day and it's not an issue, but then like for us, it's like I was joking with someone over the summer. I have a tattoo for the folks at home can't see it, but it's like
Ooh.
torn flesh on my
Oh my
sleeve, and
God.
it has my name, my last name on it that my son designed, and the fleshy part of it is rainbow. And
I
I
love
was
it.
like, well, I don't wear my queerness on my skin, and now I do. Like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? And so it was just this idea of like needing to be so upfront with it that I
Hmm.
was like, it is now fully a part of me, and everyone can see
Yeah.
this is who I am from the get go, so I don't have to worry about like,
Yeah.
oh, I'm gonna be treated one way and then treated completely different
Yep.
when someone discovers. And that's such an interesting thing because was talking with another guest,
Mhm.
Dr. Lulu. She is a bisexual pediatrician, and
What
she
a
now works with
great name.
right,
Mm.
fantastic. And she's like, I trademarked that, and I was like, you should, girl. That's like wonderful. Um, and she now works with like the parents of transgender and gay kids to
Mhm.
like help them process this information. And
Mhm.
she's an advocate for like inviting in versus coming out, because then it's not a
Mm.
secret that like I'm hiding from you.
Yeah.
It's more like I'm ready to share with you this thing. and
Yeah.
and I think spinning that perspective is going to be revolutionary in what people think about it, because for some
Mhm.
reason coming out still feels like I'm hiding something
Yeah.
bad,
Yeah.
and then I have to tell you about it, and it's really hard. And as a queer person, we're constantly coming out. Like
Yeah.
you and I are doing this at every single job interview
Yeah.
to to protect ourselves, but
Mhm.
we're constantly having to do it.
Yep.
And so like reframing that idea of the shame behind coming out and the
Mhm.
secret that we're keeping versus like, I'm gonna let you in on this thing because
Yeah.
I feel comfortable with you and I
I
feel
love
like
that.
you need to know that. I think it's powerful, and I think that it's interesting that um, different people, different perspectives, different places. My cat just knocked over some toys, so give me
Say no
one
more.
second.
It's a cat. That's their
It's a
job.
cat. She's gonna do that. 1 second.
Yeah, take your time.
See yourself out. Thank you.
Yeah,
She's like,
I have
finally, you opened the door for me.
I don't have any human children, but I have four bunnies, and they don't knock things over, but they just eat everything. Like they're like,
That's
"Why
fair.
is that spicy hay?" And then they just eat it. Anyway,
Yep. Um, that derailed my train of thought, but it's all right
that's
because
okay.
I think that I got my point across.
Yes.
Um, so transitioning from working as a nanny into working in, are you working in public schools? Do you work in private schools, or where do you
So
work?
I work at a very unique educational institution. It is actually a nonprofit. It's called La
Oh, cool.
Cabane, and it's because we're all Frenchy here in Quebec,
Mm-hmm.
and it's basically a homeschooling collective. So it's not like we're not a school per se, but basically it's like these kids come. These are all kids who are homeschooled, and they come for a 3 day. It's funny because when I say to people, I'm like, it's like homeschooling, but we do it together. They're like, Seth, that's like school. And I'm like, no. Um, but basically, they come for a 3 day program and it's bilingual. So some of the days in French, some is in English. Some of the kids speak only French, only English, or bilingual. So it's a really, really unique kind of experience. But basically, I'm the weak link who only speaks a little bit of French. I'm working on it.
How dare you?
I know, but basically, it's sort of your typical, the schedule seems it's reflects a little bit of what school is like. So it's Basically, in the morning we have circle time, and it's so funny when I first interviewed, and they were like circle time. I'm like, okay, we like sing songs. We're like, no, we like talked about like what do you call it? Oh my gosh, my brain is. What are the schools that the indigenous folks were forced to go to that I can't think of the name of?
Oh, yes.
But
I've
like,
been reading a lot about this recently.
and
I've
now
been
my
reading a lot of
brain is,
Canadian
I'm having
history
a
for some
brain
reason.
fart, but yeah, but basically like they started finding all these bodies, and like we talked to the kids about that, right? And we had a book about like I used to, for a couple of years I hosted a podcast called Rad Child Podcast, and so we basically, it was about like how to talk to kids about tricky topics like that. And so I got really big into like kids books about those kinds of things. So we would, in the morning we would talk about, and it wasn't always serious topics. The next day it might be like, oh, the Habs won hockey or whatever. But it was important. Like I really love that. Like I have a space to be able to talk to them about stuff like that, all these kinds of things. But anyway, so in the morning we have like circle time, and then we work on something called the défi, which means challenge in French. So basically, for a month, the kids propose projects, and for a month we work on these projects, and they're mostly community based. So like it's a question, it starts with a question. So like, how do we keep people experiencing homelessness warm during the winter, right? Like
Oh,
figure
you
out ways
froze
to
for a second.
Oh, I froze. Am I back?
You are back.
Okay, karate chopping.
So
But
the last
basically,
thing I got was we start with a question. How do
yeah,
you
so
keep
so we start with a question. So like for example, one of them was how do we keep people experiencing homelessness warm during the winter, right? And then we make a whole project about that, and we try to help in some way. And we did one last semester that was all about the 2S LGBTQIA plus community, and like how do we be good allies or things like that. And some of our kids identify as being members of the queer community, but for and they all had different levels of knowledge around that. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. So we do projects like that, and that lasts a month.
That's
And
fantastic.
then they have lunch. They have 2 hours of free play. Okay, in the public schools here, 15 minutes. Okay,
2 hours sounds fantastic.
they have 2 hours of free play.
More recess, less classwork. I'm here for it.
And then at the end of the day, they have a choice between 3 workshops, and they do that workshop for the whole semester. So it's things like dance, woodworking. I'm teaching sign language right now, like all different. And again, it's child led, so the kids say what they're interested in, and then we build curriculum around that. It's really, really cool, unique place.
That's fantastic. I love that. I love the focus on social emotional learning, where you are literally have circle time every day, and you're talking about like real world issues, and then like having those tough conversations with kids, but then also being able to be like, oh, so Taylor Swift's album came out at midnight, right? Like last night or whatever.
Literally last year we were doing at circle time, we called it Newsday Tuesday, so we'd read a news article every Tuesday. And one time the article was literally about a dog, this was in the UK I think, a dog that was stuck in like a swamp. They used drone and tied a sausage to the drone and lured the dog back to safety with a sausage on a drone. Like, so we would like, it's getting them reading, but it's like about animals, which is the thing they're interested. Like, it wasn't always like these, dark, sad topics sometimes, but like, sometimes we would also just, hear about news that was fun, because it can't just always be depressing. This is why I don't like watching news, because it just makes me sad. Like, it's always focused on the depressing stuff, But like, for example, other circle time, I noticed that some of the kids were and just for reference, they're between the ages of 6 and 11, so it's like one room schoolhouse. Like, right, this year they're separated into groups, 27 kids. But last year it was about 16 kids, and it was one group. So this year they're separated by age for some things, and then they're together for other things like lunch and play and things like that. But I noticed that some of the kids were talking negatively about their bodies, like not eating and stuff like that. And so I read this really awesome book called Bodies Are Cool. And I literally I like held it up to the kids, and the first thing, and there are like fat bodies, skinny bodies, like all different kinds of bodies on this cover. And the first thing 6-year-old was, there are unhealthy bodies and healthy bodies on the cover. And I was like, how do you know? You know nothing about these bodies, right, other than that some of them are fat, some of them are skinny, right? And so it was a really interesting conversation. And so like I also, find it really important to like talk to kids about the things that are coming up for them, right? Not just like the things that I'm imposing that I think are important. And so I really think like that kind of child-led stuff is awesome. But I'm lucky. I just feel lucky that I work in a place where I can talk about these things that are important to me, you know?
Yeah, I think that's fantastic too. I think body image is so hard nowadays, especially with
Yeah.
social media, because
Yeah.
everybody can publish the perfect filtered thing. And you always see life being wonderful, and you don't necessarily see that behind that perfect filter is a crack. And that each of us have our own cracks that we're dealing with and patching up and whatnot.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and as a person who has suffered body dysmorphia because of weight problems my whole life, pretty much, I appreciate that, because no one as a kid taught me that it's okay to love your body even if your body is bigger, and that like you can be a healthy person who is bigger, and you need to, you know, happiness doesn't come from being skinny.
And that's why like it's important for me, especially when I'm showing them books or images or, you know, videos, whatever it is, that different kinds of bodies are represented, different kinds of people or families, whether it's sexuality, whether it's gender, whether it's race or ability, or all these different things. Like it's so important to me, like that like when we're bringing people in for different things, like there's, you know, diversity, but also like if you can't have the person in front of you, like to try and make sure that the books that we're reading are feature diversity, because then it's not shocking when they see someone in a wheelchair or when they see, you know, someone who's a different color or whatever, right? It's just like, oh yeah, it's normal.
Yep, absolutely. And so jumping into working in education, especially you're working with students who are homeschooled, do you find that it was well, I'm not sure what the right question here is. I guess, what is it like working with your students? Do you feel good grief?
It's okay. Take your time.
Yeah.
This is what the magic of editing is for. Don't worry about it.
This is what the magic of editing is for. Which I've gotten really good at because I say a lot. See?
Yeah, see, podcasting is wonderful for making you realize which words you repeat all the time. You're editing and you're like, oh my God, say yeah every 5 seconds over it, you know?
I say anyway. That's awesome, wild, and
Yes, I say wild all the time because it was my replacement for crazy when I stopped saying crazy.
Yes.
I started saying that's wild. So I say that a lot. Anyway.
That's wild all the time. So my questions center, like when we're looking at the forum, they center on like working with parents, working with students, working with administration. So thinking about your working with homeschooled students, what has it been like? How have you been received as a person? Because stereotypically, and I understand this is stereotype, homeschool folks get a bad rap for being kind of disconnected from diversity.
And
go ahead.
I'm sorry, go ahead. Okay, I'm going. So it's actually really interesting because when I was actually looking for another nannying job, I was kind of like burnt out of nannying, but didn't know what else to do because I can't teach in the school system here. First of all, I don't want to. Second of all, I'm not qualified because I'm qualified back in the States, but I would have to like get everything, you know, here. You know, exactly. It's just the whole process. And I'm like, why would I pay all that money and do all that work for something I'm not even like committed to being interested in, you know? So I was looking for another nannying job, and one of the founders of this organization saw my post and was like, we really want you to apply for this listing. And I was like, okay, like I'll get it. And the things in the listing was that like they are prioritizing queer people and people of color in the hiring process. And I was like, yeah, yes, correct.
That's cool.
And so that was like a green flag for me. I was like, okay. And not that I think that they hired me because I'm trans, right? But I think that was definitely like something that they were like, wow, we want our kids to be, you know, these kids to be exposed to different kinds of people, and not in like a using me kind of way. I'm just also very highly qualified. Like I'm not, you know, but think if it was me, someone at the same level, they probably were like, we'll choose this guy because also he's got, you know, these other things going on, right? Like it was all because last year, with the exception of one person, it was basically all white women. And so they were like, you know, guys, other people. And this year, in fact, I'm one of 3 men which is out of like a group of 8 people. Like we have a very small team, so like it's pretty decent. But anyway, so that like diversity is really important. I mean, it's something that is at the core. Like inclusion is like one of their values, and so. But anyway, like, and of course, like you're gonna get parents and families with all different kinds of values in school or any kind of organization like that. But I told this for last year we were learning about the queer community and all these things. I was like, this because we do like a gratitude circle at the end of the day, and I said, I'm really grateful. This is actually the first space that I've ever been in where like sometimes I'm like I'm on the binary, like I identify as a man, but I'm gender nonconforming. So like I wear dresses, I wear it almost exclusively women's clothing because it's just more fun, objectively. And so I wear nail polish, I wear all these kinds of things, and I pretty like rather feminine. And I said to them, like, this is the first space I've worked with children. None of you questioned the way that I present myself. No one said nail polish is for girls or like, why are you wearing a skirt? Like, they were just like, nice skirt. No one cared. Like, none of the kids cared. And I thought that was like really amazing. I've never been in a space like that before. It's really a special space, and the kids are really special. I will say though that when we did that month-long like queer kind of community project that I was talking about earlier, there were 2 families that pulled out. So that was like, and at the time we were much smaller. Last year there was only 16 kids, so it was me and my other coworker Miriam, who's also queer, and she's like a queer cis woman of color, and we were just like really offended by that. Like, you're gonna, you the parent are gonna come to me to my face and be like, oh, la, 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 and then be like, but your identity is not something that can be shared with my children, right? Like, so that didn't feel great, and don't get me wrong, like I'm friends with one of those parents still to this day, and like I think they were like, oh well, we want to have those conversations with our children, but we don't understand any of this. I'm like, so then are you gonna have why would you not want the experts, the queer people, to be the one having these? It was like a cop out to me. It was just like, they didn't want to say that they were uncomfortable with it or whatever, and so that was like a little sad to me. But in general, like, most of the parents and the kids are pretty chill with that kind of stuff. We had 2 non-binary kids last year out of 16 kids. So they're pretty, like, we always introduce ourselves with pronouns, like that kind of stuff is pretty, normal there, which is nice.
That sounds wonderful. Like, I'm just thinking about the year that I had last year with the previous school district where I was like reprimanded about asking for pronouns, and like had someone, a principal who is a cisgender white woman, tell me, who is a queer non-binary person, how I'm supposed to ask pronouns. And I was like, no, that's not correct. But thank you. And because the thing is that like I was the teacher of the year. I gave this huge speech about how we need to love the children, because like really teachers have this ability to help create this whole human. And a lot of times children will feel like they're just not cared about, and it's our job to make sure that they feel like they're cared for. And I shared the story about how I was outed as a kid, and then was told, by asking pronouns you may be outing kids. And I was like, nope, I'm asking.
Oh, I have a whole story about this nonsense.
Go for it.
Last year we had a child. So the first day of class, I introduced myself with my pronouns, and I offered for the kids to, follow that format. It was, oh, hi, I'm Seth. I use them or he, they pronouns. See, I don't even know my pronouns. I use he, they pronouns, and a funny thing about myself or whatever. It was like part of the introduction, right? All the kids did it. It was, whatever. And then, and maybe some of them asked like what it was, and we explained it, and they were like, oh yeah, whatever. It wasn't a big deal. Second day, okay, it's the second day of class. We had a guest come into the space, and she introduced herself with her pronouns. And so the kids just naturally introduced themselves with their pronouns because we had done it once, and they were just following kind of the format that she had set. And the first kid up said, "Hi, I'm such and such. I'm a boy, but I use she, her pronouns." Like that was news to me, but I was like, okay. Just said it like very matter of factly, and we all went around, whatever. And this was at a workshop, so only about half the kids were there, right? And so since that happened, if I heard other people using the incorrect pronouns, I would just correct them, whatever. And I was like, oh yeah, this person is using those pronouns, and the reaction, even from like the like boyiest, sizzest boy in the class, was like, oh, okay, cool. Like they're just like, don't. Does not face them at all.
Yeah.
But anyway, so long story short, at one point, this is kind of like my fun administration story. So at the time, we were a team of about 4 or 5, and I said, one of the other team members noticed that the parents were still using he/him pronouns, and so we were like, well, let's ask this child what pronouns they want us to use with the parents, because the minute this happened, my boss was like, well, we need to tell the parents, and I was like, I'm not outing this student, like that's not appropriate, and we all agreed as a team of, again, 5 people, 3 of us are queer, last year. So as a team, we agreed that it was not appropriate to out this student. So I asked the child, I'm like, what pronouns do you want me to use with your parents? And they were like, she, her, and then like immediately turned around and was like, actually, him. And I was like, okay, great. So again, as a team, we decided we were going to use these pronouns with the parents. Then one day, the child tells me, oh, I told my parents, it's fine. I told my parents about my new pronouns. I was like, okay, great. So then mom shows up, and I start saying she, her, and mom's looking at me, and I'm like, oh, I'm using those pronouns because she said that she told you, and she had not. I don't know why this kid told me this, but then mom is like, you lied to me. You didn't tell me that they were using these pronouns and blah, 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 blah. And then administration threw me under the bus and acted as if we hadn't made these decisions together. Okay. And was like, oh, well, you shouldn't have done that. And I was like, did we? Was no one else at the meeting where we all decided 2 different times that we weren't going to out this child, right? And so that was, and then they ended up pulling that kid out of the whole program, and refusing to use the pronouns and saying that she's just doing it for attention. And I was like, okay, worst case scenario, she's doing it for attention. What are you showing her by using the pronouns she's asking you to use? That you respect her. Literally, that's it. And if she's doing it for attention and she's not getting attention, she's going to stop doing it. I had a kid I nannied once wake up from a nap. He was 4 years old and said, my name's Gabby now, and I use she, her pronouns. And literally went by Gabby and she, her for a week, and then was just like, never mind, I'm Timothy and a boy again. And we were like, okay. Like nothing else changed. It was just all we showed that kid was that we respect their decisions. And then if it ever, you know what I mean? If it's a weak phase, who cares? We let kids pretend they're turtles and cats and astronauts, but we can't respect some pronouns even if they're just trying it out, or even if it's just a game. You know what I mean? Like it makes no sense. So that was like a really unfortunate situation, and I feel really bad for that kid, because what is that kid being told? That kid is being told that like, if you ever do want to change, if your gender is something you want to explore, that's not something that we're gonna tolerate or accept. And it's really sad.
Right, and it perpetuates the idea that it's just a fad. It's just
it's a phase.
It's just a phase or something. And in reality, I have had students who have identified with one pronouns, gone through therapy, and then realized that they are actually a different set of pronouns, and they went through this process, right? But they went through that process because their parents and their teachers and the people respected them enough to be able to do that, so that they can learn about themselves, because it's really all it is learning about yourself and who you are.
Well,
it's like my
sorry, go ahead.
I guess it's not really a fair assessment, but like, my child changes Halloween costumes every 5 days. Like, she wants to be an astronaut. She wants to be a cat. She wants to be an owl. She wanted to be a drag queen for a while. And I was like, yep. And she wanted to be a beauty pageant. And I was like, all right. And it's not saying that like she, like, if she were to come to me and do a similar thing with gender, I would just respect what she's saying and be like, okay, that's fine. And just saying okay and respecting that just lets her know that I'm a safe person to talk to.
Well,
and I realize a Halloween costume is like a really
yeah,
it's a
but
dumb
still, it's about
comparison, but
expression. Yeah.
right. It's just about being there for your kid, no
Yeah,
matter what
I
the
mean, that's do
circumstances.
whatever they. Yeah, exactly, and they'll do whatever they want, but except them, when they're doing reasonable things.
Correct.
But it's like I always joke that I'm just making kids trans and queer because a large percentage of the kids that I nannied have come out as trans. And, I was making that joke with a friend, and they're like, no, Seth, it's not that you're just creating a supportive environment and feel okay to be themselves. It's that you're transing them. I'm like, yes, absolutely. It's me.
I'm
All the
transing
Republicans,
them. I
all the
love
Republicans'
that.
worst fears are true. It's contagious. Um, I don't know, but I thought
It's
that was
funny.
really interesting.
That is so funny because my best friend and I were just talking about how like she doesn't want her kids to turn out queer, and I'm kind of like, well, if they do, that's fine, and or I'm gonna support them no matter what. But she was always like, I just don't want them to turn out queer because like then people are gonna be like, it's because you're a lesbian. And
So
it's like,
funny.
well, I was raised by straight people and I was constantly around straight people, but here I am. Like,
I know. I know.
if
I
it
love
worked
that
that way, it
argument.
works both ways, right?
Yeah, right. Oh my gosh. I love when people say that. I'm just like, well, all of us queer people were like raised by a bunch of straight people, and we still turned out like this. So I don't know.
Yeah, must be the devil.
Clearly.
Obviously, obviously, it's the only solution.
Oh my god.
So, what would you say to teachers who are maybe entering the field who are a part of the community? You've had experience working for public education and you were like, meh, no, not here
Yeah.
for it, not a
Didn't
fan.
like it.
Now you work in private education, which I think is so cool, because
Yeah.
of the environment that was built for you. But
Yeah.
as a like maybe a young educator who is a part of the community and stepping into the field, what words of advice would you have for them as they're going into the field and maybe centered on being your true self?
Yeah. Well, that's like what I was just about to say. Is just like I think that first of all, I think that depending on where you live, and even if you live in like the most coolest liberal place, I think it's going to be hard, right? There are going to be kids and parents who have different beliefs, just with like the sheer number of kids, right? There's going to be kids and parents and administration who have different beliefs and values than you, and I think that's hard. But I think that just we were talking about before, like not necessarily that you need to out yourself in an interview, but I think it's just so important to just like be yourself from the get go, and because you really want to work in a place that wouldn't accept because you're wearing nail polish at the interview or whatever, right? And I'm not saying don't be professional, but like I think that it's really important to just like be yourself from the get go, be honest, and be upfront about things. And because like for me, like I wouldn't want to pretend and then get the job and then like be like, oh, I guess I can't put a picture of me and my partner on my desk because someone's not going to like it or whatever the case is, right? I thought about these things when I was first dating my wife when I was presenting as female, and because that's when I was like student teaching about that,
Mm-hmm.
about thinking, entering and starting to enter the field, and I was just like, wow, like I'm not going to be able to put up. I was in like rural Pennsylvania. I was like, I'm not going to like put up a picture of me and my wife, or like, I'm not going to be able to like talk. Like if the kids ask that question, if they're like, oh, you have a boyfriend, like what do I say, right? Like what, you know? And like I think it's so important to be able to be upfront and honest with kids. And like there's professional boundaries, right? Like you can be like, that's my personal business, also, but I don't think you should have to, like. And so I think it's just important to find a school that shares the same values as you. And I think it's going to be harder because it's going to narrow down, right, the schools that you can work at. But I think in the long run, it's important because you're just going to get burnt out, like, nerd of pretend, putting on a show, right? It's like, I mean, we're both theater people, but there's a limit, right?
It's funny. I always joke with my students that the best actors that those students have ever seen are their teachers,
Uh-huh.
because we have a whole life outside of this classroom that you have no idea about.
I love that.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
And then for final question for the episode,
Mm.
given your experience, this one, I guess you get a special question.
Ooh.
For the young adult who may, or even older adult who may be just discovering themselves and who they are in adulthood, what bits of advice do you have for them? Because like for me personally, non-binary didn't exist, right? When we were younger, those words didn't exist. They literally weren't a
even
thing.
Transgender was like, I always tell people, I literally heard, and she probably didn't use the word transgender, but I had heard of one person like quote unquote changing their gender one time in my life. My mom and I were driving. She doesn't remember this, but it was like scarring for me. We were driving in the car, and it was probably school, and she was talking about her work friend, and she was like, "Oh, she probably used the wrong pronouns." She was like, her sibling, was a man and is now, being a woman, and like, she's so ugly and no one's ever gonna love her. She makes a terrible woman, and that was the only like. And my parents weren't even like overtly transphobic or homophobic. They didn't realize, you know what I mean? They weren't like the kind of people who'd be like, screw gay people. But like, they were like quietly like that and not realizing it, kind of. And I was just like, that was the only trans person I'd ever heard of, right? So then when like my friends were like, oh, you should think about this for you, I was like, I don't have any positive representation or role model. Like, and those words didn't, if they existed, they were, they were hiding somewhere where I wasn't hearing them. Like, I didn't hear that word literally until my wife sent me that post in my mid-20s, the word transgender. So it's, but anyway, I'm sorry. I'm getting away from the question, which was advice.
Yes, advice for a person who is just discovering themselves in their adulthood.
Yes. So
I imagine that would be a hard situation.
Yeah, I think the most important thing is to find support. Whether it's like whatever city you're in, literally just Google like, if you're a trans person or whatever identity you are, just like that thing, support group, or like you're queer, if there's a queer center in your town, like if you don't necessarily have like maybe support from your family or support from your partner or friends, right? Like there's support out there. And I mean, if you're somewhere where you don't have access to those things, like if you're not in a big city, there's online support and things like that. But I think like finding that support, whether it is through people in your life or whether it's through a therapist or all these different pieces, because it's really hard to do alone. Right. And so I think that's the most important piece for me. And that helped me, was just like finding my people. Right.
I love that. I think that advice can go across the board for anybody dealing with something difficult. The first year of teaching, find your support group. It's really hard to do it alone. There's so much, like, just as humans that we are a community-based organism. We need each other. And so I think that is wonderful advice. And I think that it can be so isolating, especially if you're in a rural place, to think that you're just going through this by yourself and that there's nothing, no one to help you.
Yeah, so, for sure. And I think we've all, I think we've all been like, I don't know, in whatever different circumstance in our lives, feeling like we're the only one. And it's just like important to remember that you're not the only one, but also to find those other people. And, because it's easy to just be like, I'm not alone, but like, where without support, it's it's a hard thing to tell yourself.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. I really enjoyed our chat and learning about your journey, not only as becoming who you are, but as well as your journey in education, and that you found such a neat environment to be able to work in.
Well, thank you for having me. It was really a pleasure.
Almost.
I know. Well, I mean, we don't go that
There's
far.
Some problems.
We don't have enough time to talk about nonsense, but yes, I mean, there's going to be nonsense everywhere, so it's like it might as well be nonsense in a place where I can be myself, I guess.
Absolutely. Oh, nonsense in a place where you be yourself. Well, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and thank you for joining us on Teaching While Queer.
Thank you too.
Thank you for joining me for this week's episode of Teaching While Queer. If you haven't done so already, please consider subscribing on your favorite RSS feed and sharing the podcast with your friends and family. New episodes will come out every other week during the school year. If you're interested in joining us on the Teaching While Queer podcast, please email us at teachingwhilequeerpodcast@gmail.com. Have a great day.